Anthony fire hydrant recovery operation was launched in memory of her 5-year-old son, who died in a house fire along with his grandparents earlier this month.
All right, going to get started here. Okay, so in this session, it's the fourth of 4 sessions, and we're going to take a final look at the different impacts of light and weight on a crop of sunflower shoots. So they both have different effects, and what we're actually going to find from this study is that our experiment here was inconclusive. And there's many reasons for that potentially, but I still want to look over some of the things we learned and what we can learn from doing experiments like this as part of our production. So as a quick review, our first video was at sowing time, when we sowed the same density of seeds on both trays. On one tray, which is this one in the front, we put on a weight of about 6.5 pounds, which was about 6 pounds, which was another tray of growing sunflower. On this tray in the back, we had a 14.5 pound concrete block, which is the standard for me for growing sunflower. I almost always put that 14.5 pound block on, and for quite a while have done 2 of those and have had no issues with that. So what we're looking at with weight is are we going to see differences in germination? Because once you remove that weight, it's not going to have an effect on growth at that point. Then it's going to be light that makes a difference. But what happens in the germination stage also affects its growth afterwards. And some interesting things happened here. So the other thing is with the light, we have 2 types of light. We have a high K value light, more in the blue spectrum here, which 6500 K. And in the back, you can hopefully see it from there, slightly different tone at 3000 K. So a more of a yellow light in the back and a bluer light in the front here. Now, generally, you hear in the forums and on Microgreens tutorials to use a high K value in light, or something along the blue spectrum. And the reason being is the blue spectrum generally promotes vegetative growth. And that's what we really want here. We want green growth. Now, on a full-size plant cycle, you have the vegetative stage, but then you have the stage when the plant bolts and goes to seed. Will produce a flower, and then a fruit, and then a seed, or some combination of that depending on the type of plant it is. And that's where the yellow and the red lights come in. We won't get into that aspect of things because it's not something we do with microgreens. So generally what we see though when we're using more of a yellow light is that we see an elongation of the crop. Kind of like we would see when crops are reaching for the light when there's not enough light. It's very similar. Where you really notice it is in crops that have different leaves. And sunflower doesn't have it. Sunflower is simply a stem with our seed leaves, and then the true leaves start to come in afterwards. I know that's pretty far away, but at this point you're hopefully familiar with this. Had to do that. Now something like a pea shoot, a pea isn't just one stem with 2 leaves at the top. A pea has actually has branches, and it can have 3 to 4, maybe even more actually, depending on the size. And in yellow light, what happens is the distance between those stems increases significantly. So it can make your crop almost twice as tall. So what I would have expected to see here was shorter in the front and taller in the back. And we didn't see that. Now I don't know why, but my guess is both sides are actually getting a bit of both light. And so what I might do for the next experiment is put a barrier here between each light, so the light from each light does not cross over and get onto the other side. And little differences like that might allow us to see a difference in growth. So I want to pull things out here and take a look at a few things. Now I don't know if you can quite tell from there, and I'll get some close-ups after, is here we're pretty close to the light, but we're still seeing the plants curve in towards the light. So even the light, though the light is really close, you can see them curving towards it. So whereas on this side, they're pretty straight up because they're right under the light. So even being a little bit away from the light causes the plant to curve inwards. It's very obvious for me to see that from here. Now the 2 trays did have different germination results. I'll look at those in a second. Another thing I want to look at here is our full trays. So I'm gonna pull this up here for you to take a look at. I think you get a pretty good look at it there. Now, what you may or may not be able to tell from there is a little bit of inconsistency in the height, and I can kind of tell. You should be able to get a sense. It's not a nice, smooth, uniform crop, which I really like to see. I see some that are tall like this. I see some shorter ones down in here, another one here, taller ones here, shorter ones down below. This one's actually got a good set of true leaves on it. Now, what we're seeing here is actually the result of seeds of different sizes within the same lot of seed. And this is very characteristic of sunflower seed from Italy, actually, is you will see a lot of variation in size. Whereas one of the things that you actually really want is very uniform seed size, because you're going to get more uniform growth. So that's something I noticed right away. But you can see overall, we've got pretty good growth here, and we're not seeing a lot of difference between the front and the back of the tray. So maybe a little bit more stretching here, I can see a little bit here, but really hard to differentiate. So it's really intriguing to see that. I'm going to put that down. Now I'm going to pull our other one out here. Now this tray is an interesting case and brings up another issue. And I talked about this earlier. What you'll be able to see here is that we don't have very good growth in the middle of the tray. And so what happened is we did not get very good germination there. Now this is something I think a lot of you probably experience. I'll try to get this up so you can get a better view of that. Maybe like that. This has happened to me quite a bit, and others have talked about it. I addressed it in the comments of my last video, where you get poor growth in the middle of the tray. I'm just taking a quick look. You can see same thing, like pretty good growth overall, but we're going to get smaller yield there. So why did we not get good germination in the middle of the tray as opposed to elsewhere? So there's multiple factors in what gives us good germination. We've got the quality of the seed, but we're using the same seed in both trays, so that should be uniform. There's the soak time of the seed, and these seeds were all soaked together, so they soaked at a similar time. And then there's the moisture level of the soil. Now these two trays were prepared from the same batch of soil, but I watered them separately. And I think I gave one of these trays less water than the other one. So that means the water in the soil isn't enough, potentially, to make sure that the seeds stay moist to have good germination. Now there's another factor which comes to this idea of why do we get more poor germination in the middle of the tray. One reason could be poor airflow, but probably the more likely reason is I'm using heat mats underneath here. Now what happens is the middle of this mat tends to get hotter than the outsides. And that might be because the heat from the outside can more easily dissipate out, whereas the heat in the middle is more, what's the word I'm looking for? Insulated, so it doesn't escape as easily. So what my theory on this situation here is that it was too hot. And even though this is a hot weather crop, it was very hot, not enough moisture in there. And so what had happened is the middle of the tray didn't germinate very well. The outsides did okay. And you can see in our earlier videos that usually the tray would be pushed up, but the tray was actually kind of pushed to the side. There were sprouts growing out the side, but it wasn't pushed up. And the reason likely being is out of all the crop that was germinating, there wasn't enough germinating in order to push the tray up. So the loss of some of those seeds germinating really affected growth. In the end, we can see, and I am going to bring the camera over, is that we actually get very similar growth in the end. And I'm going to take this over here. Like if you look at these trays just sort of basically, like the growth is pretty good on both of them. I'm going to come around here. Now if we didn't have that spot in the middle, which is pretty obvious here, we would have crops of similar growth, similar height, potentially a little bit of, this looks like potentially a little more ununiform. So in other words, like lots more tall and lots more short ones, whereas this one is a little more uniform relatively. So I'm seeing distinctions there. It's always hard to know what causes what. So my process is always that of thinking about all the factors And the thing I tend to ask about the most is, what have I done differently here? What have I done that isn't what I regularly do? What have I done that is out of character? And the couple things, actually, really the only thing that I think I can account for here is not having given this tray enough water. And I think I mentioned it previously, is I even thought about it when I was watering. I thought, put a little more water on here, because I know it's the #1 factor in poor germination in most of my crops. So it's been an interesting experiment, and I will do this again. And what I will do, as I said, is I'll block the light off, because I've really seen on a commercial scale what happens when you have like a dominant yellow light versus a dominant blue light, and it really changes the structure of the crop. And it's a really good example of the different effects of light on growth. The other thing to keep in mind is there's things here to consider when you apply these principles to your system. Number one, I'm using heat mats. That's a factor in growth here. So if you're not using heat mats, try to keep that in mind if you're thinking that germination is slower or you're not having this problem in the middle. Things like that. Other things, this is sunflower. So this might be different with pea or radish or arugula or amaranth, especially when it comes to weight. Now, we did 6 and 14.5 pounds here. Some of those other crops you might want to do 2 and 4 pounds, for example. Even though we can usually do those 14-pound blocks on a lot of our crops, even a lot of the brassicas and the finer ones, there we might see a difference where a slightly lighter weight may do better. And I'll try to fit some of those in. The reason I do all my stuff on these videos with sunflower is because it's the only one I grow consistently to eat. I think it's really the only thing that justifies using up this space in terms of value for the time and seed that goes in. So, my personal opinion. So for now, hopefully that's some insight into probably, while I wanted this to be an insight into the effects of light and weight on crop, what this really is hopefully more of an insight into troubleshooting, understanding what's going on and why, and being able to observe that stuff. If you've always had poor quality seed, you'll be very used to seeing a non-uniform height here. And then one day you're going to get a very uniform size seed, and you'll see this. It's almost like looking at a carpet, like you're laying down and looking across the carpet. It's perfectly uniform, and it's a really beautiful thing to see. This isn't necessarily a problem, but as you might know, smaller seeds take longer to grow, and they're more likely to have a hull attached. So it's going to make harvest more difficult. It's going to make removing hulls more difficult. This is a function of the seed, and we're seeing that in both trays because it's not about a difference in how we've grown them. The seed is consistent. Where we are seeing the difference is in germination, especially near the center of the tray. And as we talked about, that's likely due to too much heat and not enough water, or maybe just one of those factors. It's hard to know. So when you are troubleshooting, it's really important to take a look at a lot of these factors, take a look at all the information you have, and look for things you've done differently. And the same way, I think if you're posting to a forum and you're asking a question, posting a picture and saying, I didn't get good germination on my sunflower, what do I do? That's not really helpful. And to be honest, the answers you get aren't going to be helpful as well. So when you post these questions, try to give as much information as you can. You're going to get a better quality answer. There's so many things to consider that without that information, you're not going to get good advice. And it's that digging that's really going to help us uncover what might have happened. So that's our series there on light and weight on the effect of growth. I was hoping to get something more profound, but we're going to do this again, and I'll have other stuff coming. So hopefully you found that useful. I'll keep more stuff coming, and good luck with your growing exploits.